Hey Indiana coaches, sorry I didn't get to finish my presentation yesterday. I'm going to upload my PDF because not all of you got the handout, but then there's some things that I felt it would be easier instead of typing and adding things to the PDF. It would just be easier for me to explain, so I'm uploading a little video for you. We left off with our score sheets and these little translation bubbles that I put on there for you. And we went over pom and we went over jazz. Really the only difference for hip hop on overall effect, the communication and projection, is that hip hop you can utilize a more aggressive attitude instead of smiling all the way through and trying to sell it that way like you would with a pom or a lighthearted jazz. Hip hop, you can definitely have a more aggressive attitude. Also, with hip hop, there's a difference in technique. Pom, we talked about, is more like athletic and boxy. Jazz is going to be more flowy, utilizing proper jazz technique. Hip hop, floor work and tricks, they've got to be in there and they've got to be done with good hip hop technique. What is good hip hop technique though for regular hip hop moves? You hear lots of judges say, get low. And what that means is basically a nice wide base, a really wide second, so they're going to actually get low, bending of the knees, and that also in hip hop you've got to utilize that core as well. So the moves should go through the torso as well. Big moves initiated from the core. I know a lot of you don't do kick, so this is basically for just a couple judges. One in particular I know, the little blonde that watches her team like this, that I said hello to yesterday. So kick choreography, it's going to be different obviously than pom and jazz. You're going to create different shapes and use a variety of kick sequences. Challenge yourself and make the difficulty level appropriate for your team. You can use standard traveling, but a lot of times in kick routines it's also a good idea to travel while you're kicking. Kick technique, let's talk about posture. I think it's hard to keep your back straight and kind of perform through the chest, but that's really what needs to happen during a kick routine. Don't let that chest meet the leg. Make sure that you keep it all up and you're performing with nice posture. Let's talk about hooking up for our kicks. Your thumb needs to be tucked in. You can't really see like a big claw like that. That looks bad. So make sure that you tuck in those thumbs because those are really noticeable. If that's a big problem for a lot of members on your team, you can also utilize a hookup where it's just right behind your the dancer's back. That's right next to you instead of on their shoulder. But most of the times people can get the on the shoulder thing. Watch your feet during your prep. Make sure that they're together. And then also watch your knee and of course point through the foot, the entire foot. Your knee should be straight from the prep all the way up on a regular kick, except if it's one of the développé kicks that you sometimes utilize. So that basically does it for hip hop and any of the changes for hip hop and kick, since we didn't get to go through those score sheets. The next thing I was going to go through is the rubric that the judges use, and I included just this old school rubric. I like to use this one, and then this more detailed one that has all kinds of descriptors. And the reason I wanted to talk about that with you is I think it's such a great way that your organization uses to communicate where your routine is. And what's cool about it is that it has all kinds of descriptors for what the different boxes mean. So instead of looking at the number that you're given, instead I would suggest that you look at these descriptors. And if you look at the descriptors, a box 4 between 80 and 89, I think, hang on, yes, between 80 and 89, that's what advanced and excellent is in your organization. So I think sometimes, and I've been on that hamster wheel too, where it's like, why can't I improve? And I know that I shared some personal stories with you guys yesterday about that. I think it would make you feel better if you look at the descriptors instead of just the number, because sometimes that number can be deceiving. Maybe you got a certain score last week and you thought that you would really make some gains the following week, but you have to understand that the judges are not just judging you, they're also kind of comparing you to everyone else they've seen that day, but then also they're comparing you with sort of everything they've seen and everything that's going on in the dance team world. So I know it's hard not to get personally invested. I know I have in the past too, where it's like, you know, why are these judges not recognizing brilliance when they see it? And then also too, why I think you get personally invested because you've seen the routine go from something really rough to whenever they get it cleaned up and they're making improvements and we've worked on it so hard and we've come such a long way. And so in our minds, it's intricate and superb and maximized when really it still might be, when you compare it to everything else in the dance team world and other teams that they've seen that day, it still might be developing. So just keep that in mind and try not to fall into that trap of getting bogged down by the score sheets. Remember, redefine success in other ways for your team too, or else you're going to go crazy. So that was basically all I wanted to talk about with the boxes. The last part of the PDF is all about improving routines. So I talked about overall effect fixes. A couple of things, and you can read this on your own, but a couple of things that I wanted to draw your attention to was a lot of times when we video a routine, we do it from way up at the top of the bleachers, and you know, that way you can see what shapes you're making and you can pick out how it looks overall. But if you want to up your score in overall effect, a good idea is to video the routine and get close-ups, and that way too you can recognize the people that are performing the routine in a way that you would like. And then too, you can maybe have your performer, you can point out this is the goal, and then they can emulate that performer. But they can't do that because if you don't get close-ups with your video, because they're performing right next to him or her, so they don't know. Okay, let's talk about choreography fixes. I mentioned that you need to strengthen the story arc. If you feel like your choreography needs to be punched up a little bit, this is what I mean by story arc. This is like what we all learned in English class, how a story goes. You know, it starts out and then it builds and then here's the climax and then you have your resolution. So if that's what it looks like for a regular story, for a routine for dance team, it almost looks more like a heart rate monitor. So it needs to consist of all kinds of peaks and valleys. And your high points, like this would be the climax of your routine, the coolest thing. And I would put that, like here's the middle, I would put that towards the middle end. And you know, don't stress yourself and think, oh my gosh, I don't know if my team has all the skills for all of this. You don't necessarily have to put a skill here. That's not what all the peaks should be. A peak could also be a nice visual. A peak could also be a cool transition where you make a nice shape on the floor. Basically, anytime you see a peak like that, it just basically means something cool, something that's going to impress the judges, be it visually or technically. Okay, so that's what I mean by punching up the story arc. Another thing I wanted to talk about was, one suggestion I make was getting inspiration from video sources of similar performances. So, and similar venues. And the reason I think it's important to get inspiration from those sources as opposed to anywhere is because if you get inspiration for a dance team routine from like a music video, that's not going to translate because music videos take advantage of like interesting camera angles, they have lighting effects, they'll have a smoke machine, and you don't have that. You've got a gym with like basketball lines, and that's it. So I'm sure it's against the rules to bring your own smoke machine. So make sure that you get your inspiration from, I mean, you can watch as many movies or music videos that you want and get inspiration, but be careful about how that's going to translate. It might not have as big of an effect. Let's talk about transitions, because that's, I think, where a lot of times choreography needs to be improved. So take a close look at your transitions, and if it is just kind of stopping the action and then walking to the next thing, starting the action again, and then walking to the next thing, Really that's just a series of starts and stops. That's not allowing your transitions to flow. And there's also a way too that you can utilize transitions to punch up the choreo and make it more visual. Okay, so just a couple of tips and tricks for how you do that. Here's just your standard dance team formation, 3 groups, and it can pretty much be any shape. So a lot of times, like when you are spread out like this, you think, okay, well, let's get back together, and you would just sort of smush them like that. But you can utilize this opportunity to make the transition a picture. So they could maybe perform some in-place choreography, but then you could have this group sort of circle around and create a line here, or actually circle around and kind of create a diagonal here, and this group could circle around, or the opposite way. So that this way you have sort of a circular visual here while they're standing in place. Another thing you could do, a lot of times we say to dance through transitions. Shane, leap and down. You know, you could have them do that this way, you could have them do that that way. When you're all spread out on the floor like this, like a nice formation like that, I think a lot of times we don't think about how long it's going to take these people to, if we want to fill it in, to like get here. And that's whenever it pulls focus, you're staring at this poor little thing that has to, you know, really run, while these guys here just get to kind of stay in place. So a better way to utilize a transition would be to have these lines kind of converge into an X, utilizing windows, and then spend a little bit of time in that X, and then you can fill in. It's easier to fill in from an X than it is to try and cover all that space. Because I think a lot of times people, you know, would just think, oh, we're just going to fill that in. But you're missing an opportunity to create another picture, a nice little transition like that. I think this is how a lot of us do our formations. We'll grab a piece of notebook paper because it has lines on it and make X's. What I would suggest you do if you're getting dinged all the time on transitions, if you hear over and over again that it's a series of starts and stops, or your transitions need to flow, think about a shape. It's almost like staring at ink blots or whatever, and what picture do you see? I don't think it tells anything about you psychologically, but you can certainly up your choreo if you utilize shapes. Like, you know, of course you see these lines and you see those lines, and there's nothing wrong with utilizing that. But what I see too is an inner rectangle and then an outer rectangle. How cool would it be to have like some movement going this way and then some movement going the opposite way here? Another thing too, you want to put in your routine is levels. And you know, all of us know, like, you could go from low to high, front to back. But another thing you could do is, you know, go from low to high on the diagonal. So I would suggest that you spend some time staring at your formations on paper. And this is another thing too that you could share with your choreographer, is we need to sort of up the creativity on our transitions. Maybe try to utilize just regular old walking transitions twice in your routine. And then the other times, take advantage of those opportunities to create some pictures. Another formation that you see a lot of time is windows. And this is great because you can kind of acknowledge the lines going this way, you know, lines kind of going in and out, lines going, you know, with windows that way. So that creates a lot of movement and visual interest in your routine as well. And what else do you see here? I see like, I see diagonals. I also see like little V's. So this would maybe be a good opportunity too to pick out a wedge here. You could have people doing things in a wedge, and then these could be like levels down on the ground. Or yeah, all the way down on the ground, maybe take a knee. All the way down on the ground, maybe take a knee. And then this group here could do some standing choreo. I also see this as a great way to utilize some ripples and visuals. You could go front to back. You could go diagonal, front diagonal to back diagonal. This is also another good way to, a lot of times we just perform facing the front. In this formation, the front would be down here. But what about utilizing this opportunity to turn the entire formation, or to make the focus the diagonal and have the entire team travel this way? Another thing I would think about too with transitions is so many times, and formations, so many times teams, it's almost like there's a big magnet in the middle of center court, and we go out, then we come back in, then we go out, and then we come back in. There's no reason why you can't like spend some time in the back diagonal, or stretch out and go all the way across the floor. It doesn't have to be blob in the middle, bigger blob, blob in the middle, bigger blob. And another thing to think about too is your traffic patterns. Like look at marching bands. They usually don't do, or like good collegiate marching bands, they usually don't do, big blob out, big blob in. They'll wind around and create visual interest that way too, instead of just traveling. So basically that was what I was going to share with you. Everything else I think you can read on your own on this PDF. And I think that's it. I had a blast. Really enjoyed talking to you guys.